G'day guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we are here to do the preview to round 7, a couple of big matchups willing to come, a couple of real 50-50 games coming up, and of course you have the Anzac Day games, which we will get to first. The Anzac Day Eve game between Melbourne and Richmond, probably a week ago we'd be saying, let's not even watch this one, but a very interesting contest coming up with both teams winning on the weekend. Of course, Melbourne up against Fremantle to get their first win of the season, and the Tigers absolutely shocked the Gold Coast Suns to get their second win of the year. Both teams pretty low on the ladder, but this is an all-important 4 points, arguably a game that will probably decide which team will finish higher on the ladder at the end of the year. Now, Melbourne probably have a lot more experience around the ground as a whole, but they do have a few injuries at this stage, and their forward line is a question mark. Richmond, you're probably expecting a bit of ups and downs throughout the year. They can really get up for some games, but other ones they do tend to look like their games are gone at halftime or they're gone in 3 quarters. My brother and I have both given some interesting points regarding this game. He has said that Melbourne looked way more efficient moving the ball last week. Richmond we've seen be hit and miss throughout the year, and honestly can't really rely on them to win 2 in a row. Main reason why I will be picking Melbourne over Richmond is because of the 5-day break. I believe the older players of the Demons will be able to deal with that a lot better than the Tigers, who they do have some older players in there, but they do have a lot of young players who I think will struggle off a 5-day break that they will have to play against here. So that's why I'm going Melbourne, pretty similar to my brother. In saying that though, Richmond were very impressive, and they have been the more consistent team of the two in this season so far. So I think it's an interesting game. I do think the Demons will have them in the end, but if the Tigers can bring that sort of fight this week, then they may very well be 3-4 going into round 8. That would be amazing from people saying that they won't even win a game this year. After that, of course, we get to the traditional Anzac Day clash, Collingwood v Essendon. A massive matchup, of course, and over the previous couple of years, these games have been extremely close. A couple of draws between these two teams in the past, but of course, Collingwood are flying at the moment. Essendon coming off a couple of wins in a row. However, they've been against lesser sides, so this is a real test of the Bombers. Looking at it, Essendon did get Peter Wright back last week, and against the Eagles, even though they weren't the best, Peter Wright was brilliant with the 6 goals. So if he can hit the scoreboard on Anzac Day, then maybe they can find an avenue to try and score goals. However, looking at it, simply Collingwood look too good at the moment. Their defence is very, very good, and Essendon are going to be extremely hard to rely on in the middle of the ground, especially now that they have to go to their 3rd-string ruckman. Yes, Todd Goldstein has a lot of experience, but has yet to play in the ones this year, so to rely on a guy who has not played senior football is going to be tough. The Bombers, in my opinion, also don't have a great matchup for Nick Dacos. Now, Sam Durham potentially could go to him at stoppage, but I think he's just going to be too quick, too fleet of foot for the Essendon midfielders, and I think that's where they're going to be won. I do think Collingwood win this one. My brother has said the same. It's pretty simple in the end. Collingwood are in insane form right now. I don't think Essendon will have enough to find a way to get through Collingwood. Their defence has been really good this year. The Pies the last few weeks are dominating through the middle of the ground with Nick Dacos in probably the best form of his career, which is insane to say looking at him over the first couple of years of his career, but he's just in insane form right now. And the Bombers, yes, they've looked better the last few weeks, but not against great opposition. The Friday night game on Anzac Day is such an interesting contest. Freo up against Adelaide in Perth. What a contest this is. The Crows, one of the best attacking teams in the competition right now, against Fremantle, who lose against Melbourne last week, have been right up and down. A real roller coaster of a season for them so far. A team that was expected at the start of the year to potentially be pushing for top 4, teetering around that middle mark of the ladder right now and have an even ledger of 3-3. I think the Dockers will respond. I think they have proud players out there. You got the captain in Brayshaw, Sarong as well, and their defence has been beaten at times this year when I think that's their strongest line, so I think they will respond. I do also think that Fremantle have the defenders to cover the Crows forwards of looking at Walker, Thilthorpe and Fogarty if he does play. That will be a massive out for Adelaide if he does not get up. And I think this game will be decided by the real star factor players. And I think there's some massive matchups in the middle of the ground. You got Rankin and Sarong, Dawson and Brayshaw. You got Hayden Young and Matt Crouch as well. A massive matchup through the middle of the ground. So 2 good ruckmen as well. Riley O'Brien, one of the best hit-out ruckman in the competition up against Darcy, real strong competitor. So I have personally gone with Fremantle. I simply don't think the Crows have a good enough matchup for Caleb Sarong. And if we've learned about that in the first 6 weeks of the season, if you stop Caleb Sarong, you stop Fremantle. If you can't stop him, Fremantle win. I don't really see a matchup that the Crows will go with here. Maybe James Peatling coming back into the team. He has done it with the Giants in the past. Maybe he does a pseudo-tagging role against Caleb Sarong. However, I think he's such a proud player. He was pretty poor last week against the Demons. I think he will respond, and I think they'll have a massive rise through the middle of the ground and the Dockers will win. However, my brother has picked the Crows. He says he doesn't think they have an effective matchup to go against Rankin. He also thinks Freo are heavily reliant on Josh Tracy to kick them a winning score here, and he does say that the Crows' defence can stop them from doing that. And I think a very underrated defender so far this year is Nick Murray. The games that they've won this year at Adelaide, Nick Murray has been a part of. When they've lost in those 2 weeks, he has not been a part of the team. So a very important player back in the team last week for the Crows, and we saw how well they were against the Giants. Granted, the Giants didn't have Jesse Hogan, but if they can find a way to stop Josh Tracy scoring, it's going to be tough for the Dockers to find a winning score. And I also think we have to mention Shea Bolton. He seems in the last couple of weeks to really get his season up and going. He had a pretty slow start, but I think last week a little bit more electric around stoppage. And I think he's ready to have a real breakout game. So keep your eye out on Shea Bolton. But now to the final game we want to take a look at here. The Gold Coast Suns up against Sydney. Sunday early game, 12:45 I believe this is. What a massive contest for the Gold Coast, coming off a really bad loss against the Tigers, and the Swans currently 2-4. Now, I think the Swans have shown some decent signs last week, despite the loss against Port Adelaide. If Sydney cleaned up their ball skills, and if they find that forward link up, I think that they would have won that game. And my brother has made the point that he thinks the Swans can win this one as well. Could go either way. If McCartan does play up forward, then the Swans have lost this game before it began. He's also mentioned the fact that the Gold Coast will need to respond. They weren't very effective using the ball inside 50. They did have 20 plus inside 50 against the Tigers last week. And one player I want to put on the spotlight here for Sydney, not just Tom McCartan. I think 100% he has to play defence. He is not a forward. He doesn't have the forward craft, and I think the experiment should be finished. But a player they want to put under the spotlight for the Swans is James Jordan. I think over the past couple of weeks, he has really lowered his colours in terms of the tagging role. He was well beaten by Nick Dacos, a player that he has been able to keep under wraps in the past, and Connor Rozee. Went to him in the first quarter and a half against Port Adelaide, and he honestly just got outshone. He's a pretty athletic player, James Jordan, and Rozee just ran rings around him. He had to be moved to Zach Butters and didn't really have a lot of impact there either. So James Jordan, whoever he goes to, it's a real important matchup this week up against the Gold Coast Suns. Probably Noah Anderson, I would say. I don't know if he has the bulk to take on Matt Rowell at stoppage, but either way, has to stop one of those midfielders, and if he doesn't, the Gold Coast will go all the way to win this one. I personally and my brother are going to be picking the Gold Coast Suns. It's up at the Gold Coast as well. The Swans, I just don't think have that forward structure at the moment. I don't know if they can kick a winning score. Yes, Aaron Francis was a good option last week, but Hayden McLean could have had an opportunity to kick some goals. They're players that could do it, but I can't rely on them to do it at this stage. So my full round 7 tips are Melbourne to beat Richmond, Collingwood to beat Essendon, Fremantle to beat Adelaide, Brisbane to beat the Saints, Port Adelaide to beat North Melbourne, GWS to beat the Bulldogs, Gold Coast to beat Sydney, Geelong to beat Carlton, and Hawthorn to beat the West Coast Eagles. And my brother's tips for round 7 are Melbourne to beat Richmond, Collingwood to beat Essendon, Adelaide to beat the Dockers, Brisbane to beat St Kilda, Port Adelaide to beat North Melbourne, GWS to beat the Dogs, Gold Coast to beat Sydney, Geelong to beat Carlton, and Hawthorn to beat the West Coast Eagles. Now, I won't be able to cover the league for this week for our AFL tipping comp because I am recording this on Monday afternoon, just before the tips. However, at this stage, looking at it just before the Geelong game, we do have Brandon Stephen with top with 4 tips. I currently have 3 over the week, picking Hawthorn today, and my brother has 3 tips who's picked Geelong today. So a couple of interesting ones looking at the rest of the week. And Ethan Sports currently looking at it, only got 2 this week so far, has got the 40 tips and is currently on top of the AFL tipping ladder. But guys, thank you for watching the preview to round 7. I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with all your AFL content. But that is all from me, so I'll catch you all next time.